Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on British politics. The Conservative British government has met with severe criticism with its plan to radically abolish all standards and regulations adopted from the EU until they did their Brexit. And not only opposition and environmental organizations, but also members of their own Tory party warn of drastic consequences. The corresponding legislative package, the retained EU law bill, was on the agenda in the British House of Commons on Wednesday. After that, it is the turn of the House of Lords now, and their resistance is also to be expected. According to the plans, thousands of laws, regulations and standards that were adopted from EU times now after Brexit are to expire by the end of the year. The Labour Party proposes extending the deadline to 2026 to protect workers' rights. And the opposition party has also tabled amendments on various issues, including regulations on toy safety, animal transport, and the treatment of part-time workers. According to a BBC report, the government has so far identified 2,400 EU laws that have been adopted after Brexit. According to official estimates, around 1,000 new laws would have to be passed to regulate the fields. Conservative Brexit supporter and former Brexit Secretary David fears that the law would overly strengthen the government and weaken Parliament. The aim of the Brexiteers was to give power to Westminster, not to Whitehall. That's what he told the BBC, referring to the address of various government institutions. Environmental organizations fear that the government plans will result in a significant weakening of environmental standards and nature conservation, for example with regard to water quality, air pollution, chemicals or energy efficiency. Great Britain wants to provide Ukraine with Challenger 2 main battle tanks to ward off Russian war of aggression. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said so in a conversation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as the British seat of government, the Downing Street, announced last Saturday in London. Tanks are considered important for recapturing occupied territories. So far, however, Ukraine has only received battle tanks from Soviet production that were in the inventory of Eastern European NATO countries. Ukraine has long demanded the delivery of the German Leopard 2, which is technically superior to Russian tanks. The German federal government has so far rejected the step, pointing out that other allies have not given Ukraine any modern battle tanks either. This was also based on the fear that NATO could be drawn into the war in Ukraine. With London's announcement, the arguments of the federal government are likely to be even more difficult to maintain. They recently decided to deliver Marder armored personnel carriers to Ukraine. Zelensky thanked Sunak now for his support via Twitter and stressed that the decision would send the right signal to other partners. More than 10 months after the start of the invasion, Russia has occupied a good 18% of Ukraine's territory, including Crimea, which was annexed in 2014. Ukraine is almost completely dependent on Western arms supplies. In addition to light weapons and ammunition, Berlin has already delivered heavy self-propelled howitzers and anti-aircraft systems. In addition, the delivery of the 40 Marders armored personnel carriers was announced. Due to the strike by the nursing staff, patients in the healthcare system in England are currently having to prepare for long waiting times and absences. In the struggle for higher wages and better working conditions, thousands of nurses in England laid down their jobs. The walkout, called by the Royal College of Nursing Union, was expected to last until Thursday. Further strikes have been announced for February. The fronts are hardened now. The union is demanding a plus that is well above the inflation rate of more than 10% recently. The Conservative government, on the other hand, does not want to increase its offer, which corresponds to around 4.5% more wages. And in Great Britain, health is a national matter, or in Germany we would say a state matter. British Health Secretary Steve Barclay, on the other hand, wrote in an op-ed piece for The Independent with a view to the well-being of patients, If we agree to unaffordable wage increases for health workers, we are taking billions of pounds from where we need them most. Well, where is that? Prime Minister Rishi Sunak wants to limit the right to strike with a controversial legislative initiative in order to ensure basic services in critical areas such as healthcare. But the NHS is chronically underfunded and severely understaffed. NHS Confederation boss Matthew Taylor has warned of a long war of attrition between government and unions if there is no agreement. The NHS Confederation brings together health service organisations. The inflation rate in Great Britain has fallen for the second month in a row, mainly thanks to falling petrol prices. Consumer prices rose 10.5% in December, down from 10.7% in November, according to the Office for National Statistics, the ONS. The price wave reached its peak so far in October at more than 11%. Great Britain is thus following the trend in the USA and the rest of Europe, where price pressure is also easing. The trend suggests that inflation has peaked. That was said by David Barrier, economist at the British Chamber of Commerce, but that just means prices will stabilize at much higher levels than a year ago. It is still too early to give the all clear, especially given that the inflation rate is still 5 times the Bank of England's target. In addition, according to government statistics, wages and salaries, excluding bonuses in the UK, rose by an average of 6.4% in the 3 months to November, the fastest since the pandemic. Fearing a wage price spiral, central bankers recently raised key interest rates to 3.5%. Economists expect another rate hike of 50 basis points in early February. Fighting inflation is made more difficult by the strikes in the public sector, which have been going on for months. For the first time in Great Britain, a Prime Minister is using his veto power against Scotland. Just before Christmas, Parliament in Edinburgh voted in favour of a liberal transgender law. For the law to apply, King Charles III needs to sign the law. But this will not happen now as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak prevents it with his veto. That was reported by the English newspaper The Guardian. The transgender law is intended to help affected people who suffer from a gender identity disorder, as they put it. I'm not saying it's suffering, but according to the law, a psychiatric report is no longer required so that the sex can officially be changed. And in addition, the minimum age for the change in the register should be lowered from 18 to 16 years. On Monday evening, Sunak informed Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon from the Scottish National Party, the SNP, that he would use his veto. This is the first time since the Scottish Parliament came into being in 1999 that a Prime Minister has vetoed it. Due to the now prevented signature of the King, the law cannot come into force. Religiously, Scotland and England also follow different paths, for example, in the case of homosexual marriages. While church marriages are possible for same-sex couples in Scotland, this is not possible in England and Wales. Despite years of renewed debate, it will still not be possible for same-sex couples in England to get married in a church. That was reported by the BBC on Wednesday. In February, however, the bishops want to vote at a meeting. Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has defended his Conservative Party's Secretary-General Nadeem Zahawi after allegations about his tax affair. Zahawi has completely clarified the matter and I have nothing to add, is what Southampton-born Sunak said on Wednesday during the weekly question time in the British Parliament. A government spokesman added that the Prime Minister has every confidence in Zahawi. A report in the newspaper Sun had previously triggered discussions. As a result, Baghdad-born Zahawi reportedly paid the tax authorities a 7-figure sum to settle a dispute over his tax affairs. The former finance minister has been accused of using an offshore company in Gibraltar as part of his role as a shareholder of the polling institute YouGov, which he co-founded. He has had a steep rise in the Conservative Party. The native Iraqi who came to Great Britain as a refugee at the age of 9 has already held various ministerial posts under ex-Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Hard coal is to be mined again in Great Britain for the first time in more than 3 decades, and the government recently approved it. The non-profit think tank Green Alliance is now warning that the proposed mine alone will release over 17,000 tons of methane a year. According to the NGO, this is so much that Great Britain will meet the climate target of emitting around a third less methane not by 2030. Methane is broken down faster in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, but in the short term it's about 80 times more harmful to the climate than CO2. The British government argues that the coal is used for domestic steel production. The mine is also expected to create many new jobs in Cumbria in northwest England. The new coal mine is not the only concern of environmental protection groups in Great Britain. In the future, new oil and gas fields are to be developed off the coast. In Great Britain, the bosses of social networks are to face prison sentences if children and young people are not adequately protected on their platforms. The Guardian reports that the draft law to improve online safety, the Online Safety Bill, has now been expanded to include a corresponding requirement. Dozens of MPs from the ruling Conservative Party pushed that through. The extension of the law is aimed at those responsible if the platform does not comply with requests from the telecommunications regulator Ofcom. But anyone who tries in good faith to implement the guidelines appropriately is not affected. That at least was assured by the Minister for Digital Affairs, Michelle Donnellan, in The Guardian. Instead, it is about those who have consented or condoned that requirements to be implemented have been ignored, which can cause serious harm to children. The legal regulations in Ireland serve as a model, they say. According to the report, lobby groups in the tech industry have expressed their satisfactions. But on my main channel, I talked about Wikipedia here as well and the problems with it. A change that has also been decided is likely to be much more controversial, according to which video content and social networks will be illegal that shows people crossing the English Channel in small boats in a positive light. Platforms should proactively ensure that such content does not reach users. This reflects the fairly heated debate in Great Britain about people fleeing. Yeah, and I call this slowly real censorship there. With these 2 amendments, the bill has now been referred to the UK House of Lords. It's not yet clear whether and to what extent it will be changed there. After years of preparation, the draft law is slowly on the home straight now. Among other things, 8 verifications for the consumption of pornographic films are to be introduced. The law also aims to ban the distribution of pornographic deepfakes and photos of the so-called down-blousing without the consent of those depicted. The Guardian summarizes that the unwanted sending of sexual content, so-called cyberflashing, is also a punishable offense. However, it is no longer planned that services such as Instagram and YouTube will also have to protect adults from content that is harmful but not illegal. That was criticized as censorship. Instead, Ofcom should be able to ensure in the future that the services adhere to their own terms of use and actually block harmful but legal content. Anyone who wants to see certain legal content less often should be able to do so on these platforms. The government in London will create a list of the relevant content, including hatred based on ethnicity, religion, physical limitations, gender reassignments, or sexual orientation. And that concludes this week's report on British politics, but of course there will be my next video tomorrow. I'll see you there. I'll be back.